Mr. President.
The senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, you know, if you go back exactly 20 years ago today, I could tell you exactly where I was. I was a patient at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I was staring at the beige-colored walls, and amidst the pain in every inch of my body, I was trying to muster the strength to sit up, or to take a step, or even just to breathe. I spent months and months and months in that hospital room, hooked up to machines, getting wheeled in and out of surgeries, learning how to live again in my new post-shoot-down world. But despite it all, looking back, I consider every one of those days in that hospital room lucky days. Because when the worst happened to me, when that RPG exploded in my lap in Iraq and I needed serious, sustained medical attention to survive the hour, the day, the year, I had health care I could rely on. The same cannot be said for countless Americans. Americans whose health care costs have already been too high and whose access to care is in even greater danger if this chamber is foolish enough to confirm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as our next Secretary of HHS. Put simply, Mr. Kennedy cannot be trusted with the grave, grave responsibility that comes with this job. He cannot be trusted with our lives. He is focused on pushing his agenda regardless of the cost to middle-class Americans. And if this man is confirmed, more Americans will die preventable deaths because of his policies. Next month will mark the 5-year anniversary of when COVID shut down our nation. In this moment, it is dangerous, reckless, and heartless to everyone who lost a loved one in the pandemic to even consider nominating a guy who has stated that, quote, no vaccine is safe and effective. And if our Health and Human Services Secretary refuses to ensure children are protected against preventable yet deadly diseases like measles, RSV, whooping cough, or polio, it will be our kids, not Mr. Kennedy, who pay the price. I've gotten letter after letter from my constituents begging me to try to reason with my colleagues, to do whatever I can to prevent a man so ignorant of all things science and medicine from holding a position of such power over our children's next breath. One pediatrician in Illinois wrote to me, and I quote, I will always remember the 9-month-old infant with whooping cough who could not be saved despite every high-tech ventilator and medication we had available. Another said, I recall a father screaming and punching a hole in the wall when his 4-year-old son died of chicken pox. The stories, the letters, the avoidable tragedies go on and on. Imagine how much worse the heartbreak will become under a guy who acts like the term vaccine is a swear word. Look, the only reason that Kennedy is even up for confirmation is because he, like Elon Musk, decided to throw his dignity to the wind and bow down at Trump's altar. And because of that, he gets to be yet another rich guy with too few qualifications and too much power, somehow now charged with leading our government. Trump is running this country like the mob. Kiss his ring, pledge your unyielding loyalty, get made. It's just this time you get made into a cabinet secretary. Well, Kennedy has given Trump his fealty, so why would any of us ever think that he'd have the courage to stand up to Trump if the president issues an order that actively harms everyday Americans? How could any of us actually believe that Kennedy would fight back against Trump's worst instincts when Kennedy himself has proven time and again that he believes more in cacophony than science? Now, Americans are going to be the ones to suffer, because now, with Kennedy's confirmation, even programs as popular, effective, and vital as Medicaid will be in even greater danger. Republicans told us in Project 2025 that they would come for Medicaid, and this is the rare case when the GOP has actually kept its word, putting at risk roughly 80 million Americans who rely on Medicaid. Americans in red states and blue, in big cities and small towns, folks who may have never heard of RFK Jr., but who will certainly feel the effect when he rips away the health care their family so desperately needs. Medicaid is a lifeline for kids, for pregnant women, for people in nursing homes, for Americans with disabilities. But Republicans don't seem to care about any of that. It's obvious that Donald Trump has never stayed up late at night, hunched over the kitchen table, with a calculator in one hand and a medical bill in the other, praying to figure out a way to afford his child's insulin. No, of course not. With every passing day, it becomes clearer and clearer that Republicans care more about tax breaks for the billionaires they pal around with on the golf course than prescriptions for the middle-class folks who actually work at Mar-a-Lago. And while that teacher in Peoria lays awake at night trying to work out how she can afford her father's home care now that he can no longer get those services through Medicaid, while that new mom in Chicago who's just learned she has stage 3 cancer is trying to find a second job so she can afford both diapers for her newborn and her own chemotherapy, Donald Trump and Elon Musk will be too busy lining their already full pockets to care. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I am sure many of you have faced health crises of your own. I'm sure many of you have had a parent who's been sick or a nephew who's been in a car crash, a spouse who's been in need of an emergency C-section, or a child who has relied on an autoimmune injector. Imagine if your loved ones hadn't cared, they could rely on. Imagine if your loved ones hadn't had care they could rely on in the moment. Then ask yourself how you can sleep soundly tonight if you vote to further the agenda of a couple rich guys who so clearly don't care about making America healthy. They only care about tipping it even more in favor of the wealthy. They're not bringing back the good old days of Reagan. They're just bringing back the days of dying from the measles. And they're certainly not making America great again. They're making America sick again. That's the Trump-Kennedy promise. I care about my constituents' ability to afford their prescription medications, their ability to get the vaccines that will keep them alive through the next pandemic, their ability to survive those worst-case scenario health moments without going broke in the process. So for all those reasons and 1,000 more, I will be voting no on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination. If my Republican colleagues care about any one of those things too, then they will have no choice but to do the same. Thank you. Mr. President, I have received a number of messages from my constituents describing what access to Medicaid means to them and their families. I would like to close by asking unanimous consent that they be printed in the congressional record.